Can the Maryland Terrapins get to 9 wins after the loss to Illinois?
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, video content creator for InsideMarylandSports.com and 247 Sports, and host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you for making us part of your day. And this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Testing my skills on Prize Picks this football season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. So go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege and use code lockedoncollege for a first deposit. The Maryland Terrapins can still get to 9 wins despite the loss to Illinois. The whole point of this year, the whole goal of this year, to at least me and how I defined it, success for the Maryland football program, which is an up-and-coming program, which is continuing to get better, which seems to be improving every year, which seems to be on an upper trajectory, and Mike Locksley seems to be doing good things with the Maryland Terps, even if we have a slip-up here or there to an Illinois team. But the whole goal to me was to be able to add another win onto Coach Locksley's win total. If you don't know what I mean, every single year, Coach Locksley adds at least one win to last year's win total. 2 years ago, he had 7 wins. Last year, he got to 8 wins. And this year, I want him to be able to get to 9 wins. So I wanted to propose a question: can the Maryland Terps get themselves to a 9-win season? And I think they absolutely can. If you look at the upcoming schedule, it isn't the best. There are definitely some really good teams, 2 teams in particular, but you don't even have to beat those 2 teams to be able to get to 9 wins. And I bet you guys know the 2 teams I'm talking about: Penn State and Michigan. But Maryland next week, or in 2 weeks, you could say, a week and a half, not this weekend, but the next weekend, plays Northwestern. Very winnable. Then they play Penn State at home, and then Nebraska, and then it's a Michigan team that's a really good team, and then it's Rutgers. So I look at it at the end of the regular season, there's no question in my mind that we could be at 8 wins, and going into a really solid bowl game at 8 wins, going into that bowl game at a chance to add another win onto Coach Locksley's win total and get him up to 9 wins overall. And I'm looking at it and I'm saying Northwestern, who we play next weekend, they're not good. They're 3-3. And the craziest part about Northwestern, maybe one of the most disappointing things I've seen, is them only beating the Howard Bison by 3 points. Howard is not a good team. If Maryland played them, I would expect Maryland to win by 30, 40 points. I would expect us to crush Howard. They just don't have the talent. They're just not that type of team. They're not a Power 5 team. They're not good at all. And for Northwestern to only beat a Howard team by 3 points, even if Northwestern played a horrible game, I would still expect them to win by 20 points, to be honest. For them to only beat them by 3 points, and that's not the only thing about it, Howard actually outgained Northwestern 331 total yards to just Northwestern 312 yards. It wasn't by a ton, but for Howard to outgain Northwestern, that's pretty concerning for Northwestern. Their record isn't really an indicator of how bad they are. They're one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. So I expect us to get that win. That gets us to 6 wins. And then we play Penn State the next week at home. Don't expect us to beat a Penn State or Michigan right now. I'm here to be honest. I'm here to give my takes. I'm here to say what I actually believe in. And I just can't see us where the team is right now. I don't see us taking down a Penn State. I don't see us taking down a Michigan. I thought our best chance was against Ohio State. I thought Ohio State was a team we matched up best against. And that kind of proved to be true. We did a lot of really good things against Ohio State. It was a tie game at half. We should have been up 17-3. We should have been up 17-7, or you could say we should have been up 14-10. You could have said multiple things, but we should have been up at halftime, and the game should have been a little closer than it ended up being overall. So I thought we matched up best against Ohio State. I don't love how we matched up against Michigan or against Penn State, and a lot of things went well and went the right way and went towards us against Ohio State, and we still weren't able to pull that off because of turnovers that we had, because of play calling and different issues like that. So overall, I can't sit here and tell you guys that I think it's realistic for us to beat a Penn State or Michigan. I'm not even sure right now. I think we could probably keep it close. They're at home, but I can't tell you right now really that we could beat them or even really come really close to beating them. Maybe we make it a game. We'll get into those games later on, but overall, I'm looking at those two as losses, but we still would have Nebraska on the schedule. And I've seen Nebraska play live a couple of times, and Coach Rule is a good coach. I expected him to come into college football and be a really solid overall coach. And I'm not saying he hasn't done that. He hasn't gotten the time to build up that Nebraska team. But I don't look at that Nebraska team as anything scary. I don't look at their quarterbacks as scary. I don't look at a lot of things that they have on offense as scary. And I think that we can beat the Nebraska team. I know they've done some really good things in recruiting, and they got a couple of players in the transfer portal. But overall, that team is not a very good team, and I think Maryland will be favored against Nebraska by at least, I would like to think, 7 points, maybe even more. So overall, I think that we beat Nebraska, and that will bring us to 7 wins overall. And then the last team on our schedule is Rutgers. Rutgers, they're better than they've been overall. It's not the same Rutgers team where we can just walk in there in the last week of the season and beat them 31-0 like I think we did last season. It's not that type of Rutgers team. This is a pretty good Rutgers team. They beat Michigan State by 3. Obviously, we crushed Michigan State. Michigan State, we beat by a good amount. But overall, I think Rutgers is a really solid team this year. I think they're a lot better than they've been in the past couple of years. I think Rutgers is a pretty good team, or if we're not careful, I think we could drop that game to Rutgers. It's not an automatic win, but I do expect us to win that game. And then that leaves us at 8 wins without beating a Penn State or Michigan. If somehow, some way, it's my job to give you the possibility of us beating them. If somehow, some way we beat one of those teams, I'm expecting us to get to 10 wins. I don't think we can beat one of them, but if somehow we upset one of them, then it kind of allows us to drop another win. But I'd be pretty disappointed if we went in, or if Michigan came to us and we beat them somehow, or Penn State came to us and we beat them somehow, and then we dropped one to Rutgers. I would be disappointed if that happened, or we dropped one to Nebraska. So overall, I wouldn't expect us to beat those games, but I think we're absolutely in position to have 8 wins in the regular season. And then you can't forget about the bowl game. If Maryland wins the next game against Northwestern, which we absolutely should, we're automatically bowl eligible. And once we get to 8 wins on the season, which I think we should, and if I had to make a prediction, I would say that we get to the 8 wins. We can go into a bowl game. And sometimes college football fans can be like, I don't love the bowl games. It just seems kind of like whatever. It's like a lot of players opt out. A lot of people that are going to go to the NFL opt out. It doesn't seem like a huge deal. And I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of ways in which I agree with you on that. But for Maryland to have a chance to get to 9 wins and fight for Coach Loxley to add another win onto his win total, which I think is like a really important stat. I've talked about that a lot, but I think that could be a huge bowl game for the Maryland Terrapins, a chance for them to add another win. And then I'm also looking at the Terps as the Illinois loss that we just had. I'm looking at that for the Terps and saying, I think that helps us because I hated the loss. I made a segment on this this week, I think on Monday, on Monday's podcast, I made a segment on the Illinois loss actually help the Terps. And I think it did help the Terps in terms of it showed us that we can't just come out here and roll the ball out and say, we're more talented than you and we're not that type of team. We're no Alabama. We're no Georgia. On a bad day against Illinois, we're not going to still beat them by 20 points. It's going to a dogfight, and we can lose to them by 3. So overall, I think that helps us when we come to the Rutgers games, when we come to Nebraska, when we come to Northwestern, because we're not going to underestimate those teams. We're going to have a previous lesson of this year, a close lesson, a lesson that's close by, that even though Coach often talks about not underestimating teams and every team is really good and whatnot, you're going to have an evidence of that from the Illinois game, and you're going to learn from that and say that can't happen again overall. And I think they're going to learn from that, and they're going to beat the teams they should beat and the teams they're favored to beat to allow us to get to 8 wins in the regular season and a chance at 9 wins going into the bowl game. I would have to see the bowl game matchup to say we definitely get 9 wins, but I think 9 wins is a pretty good mark and a pretty reasonable mark for the Maryland Terrapins. Let's talk about some basketball next. Basketball season is coming closer, and I want to talk about a Terp that I think is one of the most underrated players in the country and doesn't get quite the respect he deserves. We'll talk about that after this ad from Prize Picks. Testing my skills on Prize Picks this football season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. We're the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. So go to prizepicks.com/lockedon and use Locked On College for a first deposit. This Maryland player has been one of the most underrated players in the country, and again, I think is one of the most underrated players in the country going into this college basketball season, and that player is Donta Scott. Yes, Maryland basketball season is almost here, and Donta Scott is a huge part of that Terp basketball team. I cannot talk about it enough, and I will get into that on this segment on Donta Scott being one of the most underrated players in college basketball. If you look at our 3-headed monster this year, I look at of returning players. I look at Jahmir Young, I look at Julian Reese, and I look at Donta Scott. Julian Reese and Jahmir Young have gotten all type of rewards. They've gotten all type of rewards. They've gotten preseason all Big Ten honors. They've gotten ranked as the top 100 players by different analysts in college basketball. Jahmir Young could be an All-American. Julian Reese can be an All-American. Those two guys could be first-team All-Big Ten selections. Jahmir Young is arguably, I would say, the best guard in college basketball. Julian Reese is one of the best college big men in all of college basketball, one of the best in the Big Ten, besides maybe that guy at Purdue, Edey, who's huge and seems like he's 8 feet tall, 7'6", or whatever that guy is. Julian Reese is one of the best in the Big Ten besides that guy. And overall, we forget about Donta Scott because of all the recognition that Jahmir Young gets and how talented he is and how good he's going to be. And Julian Reese as a junior has a chance to be maybe one of the best players in the Big Ten and be a first-team Big Ten selection, preseason Big Ten. All of that stuff overshadows maybe our most important player, I would say. I mean, I don't know if I would say he's our most important player, but one of the most impactful players and one of the most underrated players in the country. He's definitely one of our most important. I don't know if I would say he's the most important, but Donta Scott, let's talk about why he is so underrated in terms of the production he brings. When he said he was coming back for a 5th year after his senior season last year, I could not have been more happy because I know the production he brings in terms of scoring, in terms of rebound, in terms of everything he brings, leadership, strength, toughness, all that stuff that you look at when you talk about basketball players overall. Donta Scott brings that kind of mojo and that personality to the Maryland Terrapins, and his production has been underrated. If you look at the past 3 years, every single year he averages above 11 points per game, which besides his freshman year for the last 3 years, he's averaged above 11 points. So I'm looking at Donta Scott. 11 points is very solid in college basketball. And 2 years ago, not last year, but 2 years ago, he averaged 12 points. So I'm looking at his production as a scoring, which is the stat that most people like to look at, which is a stat. It is important. It's not everything, but it is an important stat to a player. You got to be able to score the ball. That's who makes the money. But overall, he averages like 11, 12 points every single year in terms of in college basketball for the Maryland Terrapins. And I see that as a third option. 11, 12 points is very solid. And if he continues that production this year, and maybe he ups it to 13 to 14, 14 points will be a hard mark to hit for Donta Scott, but maybe 13 points or 12 points even, or just stays at 11 points, a very solid mark. And he doesn't get credit for that kind of scoring ability he brings, but he's also a really good rebounder overall. He averaged about 6 boards. He's a little bit undersized, but he averaged 6 boards per game. And it's that versatility that he brings that I think he makes him one of the most underrated players in the country. It's not just one thing that sticks out. You could say the scoring, you could say the rebounding, you could say the toughness, you could say all those different things. But overall, it's not just one thing to me that makes Donta Scott underrated in terms of his production, in terms of his player and the allocates that he doesn't get all the time. He's tough. He can switch. He can play the 3. He can play the 4. He can guard anybody on the floor if you look at it. And whether he has to switch onto a point guard or switch onto the center and get a stop against one of those huge guys in the Big Ten, or if he has to guard a point guard for a little bit on a pick and roll, he can do so many different things, or whether he's out toughing guys. There's so many different things that Donta Scott brings to this team that are extremely important. He came into College Park looking like a man. He had to lose a couple of pounds, but overall, he came into College Park with already grown man strength. I looked at the guy, and you already knew he was going to be a grown man and grown man strength and be that kind of Big Ten physical type of player that you need in college basketball. You knew Donta Scott was going to bring that, and he did, and he's brought that the last couple of years. And that strength and that toughness that he brings, and that hard nose and his hustle that Donta Scott has, I think overall, all those components together, averaging 11 points, averaging 6 rebounds, bringing toughness, makes him extremely underrated. And a part of his game that doesn't get a lot of credit, and I'm not going to say he's elite at it, but his shooting ability. This guy can stretch the floor for being at the power forward position, at being at the 4. And he's improved at that. He didn't come into Maryland just shooting threes and being an elite shooter. Not at all. He wasn't necessarily a really good shooter his freshman year, but he's definitely developed that. And I'm going to look forward to that this year, because I think that will absolutely help the Terps this year in terms of him spacing the floor, him allowing us to go 4 out a lot of the time, and allowing Julian Reese to spot up, or allowing Jameer Young to get to the basket, or allowing Deshaun Harris-Smith to make a move and create a shot overall with the paint being open. And then maybe you can kick it out to Donta Scott. And then Jamie Kaiser's also out there spacing the floor. So Donta Scott allows you to do that type of thing, where he allows you to space the floor and brings a lot of that toughness. He brings a 3-point shooting. There's so many different things, like, you get what I'm saying, that he does that makes him absolutely underrated, and one of the better, I think, players in the country, one of the better third options in the country. I'm not going to say he's going to do it in a sexy way, in a flashy way. That's not really what he does. But in terms of hard nose, in terms of a little post move he'll give you, in terms of a 3-point shot in a game he'll give you, in terms of getting a defensive stop in a game, in terms of all those different things, you look at him as our third option, where I kind of think that we go as far as Donta Scott in terms of, if Donta Scott's playing well, we win games. If you look at the Big Ten quarterfinal, where he had 20 points against Minnesota, we win the game. When he has above 12 points, we almost win every single time. And that's kind of what Donta Scott does. When he plays well, we win. And I'm not going to go as far as saying we go as far as Donta Scott, but he kind of can really decide how this season goes. I think we know kind of what we're going to get from Jahmir Young in terms of he's going to be one of the best in the Big Ten. I think we know kind of what we're going to get from Julian Reese in terms of his production. Obviously, those guys can improve and surprise us and being even better than they've been. And maybe we don't know exactly what the freshmen are going to bring us. But Donta Scott has a chance to elevate this team into a new realm, into a top 25 team, because I honestly think we're a preseason borderline top 25 team, and we'll talk about that another day if we should be in the top 25. We're hovering around 26, but we're absolutely could enter the top 25 in the first week or so, just depending on how things fall out and on who loses games. But if he doesn't return for his fifth year, I don't think we're a borderline top 25 team. I don't know if we're one of the best teams in the Big Ten. Obviously, we still would have a lot of talent and a lot of the really good freshman class, and we still have Jahmir Young, Julian Reese, but I can't say that we would be a top 4 team in the Big Ten and a borderline top 25 team in college basketball and a team that should make March Madness without the leadership, the toughness, the versatility that Donta Scott brings. And he's absolutely underrated. Now let's talk about how are some Terps in the NFL doing? Are they playing better than you would think? How is Deonte Banks faring? We'll talk about that after this ad from Jace Medical. Everyone should be empowered to take care of themselves and their loved ones during the unexpected. That's why Jace Medical offers the Jace Case. The Jace Case provides 5 life-saving antibiotics for emergency use and gives you a peace of mind so that you are not just hoping that you have access to medication in an emergency. Jace Medical makes sure you have the medication in hand. Jace Medical is simple. They handle everything from online evaluation to licensed pharmacy medication delivery and ongoing consultation and care. Don't get caught unprepared. Save more than $360 by getting these life-saving antibiotics with Jace Medical, plus an additional $20 off by using Locked On at checkout on jasemedical.com. That's JASE medical.com, promo code Locked On. Let's talk about some Terps in the NFL. All right. The Maryland Terrapins NFL players have been playing among some of the elite in the NFL. And you got to start that with Deonte Banks, who has absolutely been on the roll for the New York Giants. The Giants haven't been any good, but Deonte Banks is one of their few bright spots. The former Maryland Terrapin is doing exactly what he did at Maryland. He is locking guys up, and ironically, he locked up fellow Maryland Terrapin Stephon Diggs, one of the best players in the world, one of the best receivers in the world, and one of the best receivers in the NFL. Stephon Diggs on 3 targets against Deonte Banks. Deonte Banks allowed 0 receptions against Stephon Diggs. There's clips on Twitter if you want to go look at it, but Stephon Diggs had an amazing game. Deonte Banks had an amazing game against Stephon Diggs, and he's had really good games against other players as well. Versus Jalen Waddle, Deonte Banks only allowed 1 reception on 3 targets. Against Tyreek Hill, only allowed 1 reception for 9 yards on 1 target. So teams aren't really throwing at him that much, and Deonte Banks is locking guys up and proving to be an elite player on that side of the ball, and absolutely can win the NFL Defensive Rookie of the Year. It's not going to be easy because there's a lot of good players at the Defensive Rookie of the Year in candidate for that, and that could win that. But don't be surprised if Deonte Banks enters that conversation for sure. He's been playing like that. And then DJ Moore, we got to talk about his performance last night on Thursday night. The former Terps wide receiver absolutely has been proving to be one of the best in the NFL. Had a historic game against the Commanders with 8 receptions on Thursday Night Football for 230 yards and 3 touchdowns. Commanders straight up couldn't guard DJ Moore. Deep routes, short routes, medium routes, DJ Moore was getting open against the Commanders secondary overall. Or if they would try and jump the ball, jump his route and jump the ball and try and get an interception, they wouldn't be able to get there and DJ Moore would turn that into like a 70-yard gain. But overall, DJ Moore played awesome and is proving to be amongst the NFL elite. And Stephon Diggs is doing his normal elite season with 49 receptions and 620 yards. So those are 3 players right there who are proving to be amongst the NFL elite for the Maryland Terps. And you got to give credit somewhere to Maryland for the cornerback and their wide receiver room. Ja'Cory Bennett is still playing a lot of minutes as well at the cornerback room. So there's multiple players that are playing, and those 3 are proving to be amongst the NFL elite. And then you look at Chad Ryland, went 2 for 2 last week against the Patriots. Patriots are playing terrible. They're not a good team right now, but Chad Ryland did give them a 2 for 2 day. Chigo Quanko also had 2 receptions for 18 yards, who I've talked about a little bit on how much he reminds me of Corey Dyches. It's kind of crazy that they both went to Maryland, or Corey Dyches is still at Maryland, but they're like the same player to me. Both speedsters, both a little bit undersized for the tight end position, but bring you versatility and bring you a different look that most of the time you just don't get from a tight end. And overall, they're really similar. Maybe not top blockers, but those guys, even if Chigo Quanko didn't go to Maryland, I would relate Corey Dyches to Chigo Quanko. It's an easy comparison to make because he went to Maryland, and it might seem like a lazy one, but they're actually really similar. But Chigo Quanko can continue to play really well and continue to make an impact for the Titans. And Raheem Jarrett is finding his way on the field, but no catches yet. But look for him to get involved eventually. Wouldn't be surprised to see a catch here soon for Raheem Jarrett, but he has played a couple of snaps for the Bucs. As long as he's on the roster on the team, sometimes that's all you can ask for. But overall, he's definitely on the making the 53, and he's active, it seems like, every single week, which is a good place to be overall. So don't be surprised if eventually he catches a screen or they get involved in a quick pass or something like that. And I hope they do get the ball in his hands at least a couple of times before the season is over. But that's all we have for today. Please like and subscribe. Tomorrow we'll be back. We'll continue to talk about basketball, but obviously it's a bye week. So let me know in the comments if there's anything you want me to touch on going into the bye week for the Maryland Terrapins. It kind of sucks we don't have Maryland football to look forward to this weekend, but after this weekend, we'll have Maryland football every single week, and then basketball will be starting up soon. So it'll be a busy time when basketball and football season come together, but I can't wait. So make sure you like and subscribe if you're excited for that. But thank you for listening to Locked on Terps.